Hello, everybody, and welcome to this webinar on insights into the legal process for those interested in selling their nursery business. Today, I'm joined by Kush Birdi, Managing Partner at Birdi & Co. Thanks for joining me, Kush.
Thanks, Briony. I really appreciate you having me here today. It's an absolute pleasure. Always great to see you, and I'm looking forward to having this chat today.
Brilliant, us too. So on to the first question. You've recently become a member of our community, and so I want to give our audience a little bit more insight into the background to Birdi & Co. So can you just detail a little bit about your history and current activity?
Yeah, absolutely. So I actually set up Birdi Co-Solicitors just over 12 months ago, and we are a boutique law firm that predominantly specialises in corporate and commercial law, mainly M&A, transactional work, etc. Although we do have 5 other practice areas such as commercial property, dispute resolution, employment, banking and finance, and we regularly support nursery owners, whether that is on the sales side of M&A transactions or on the acquisition side. So we've helped nursery owners retire from their practice. Equally, we assist clients on the buy side looking to build groups on smaller groups, not necessarily the large or private equity backed groups in the sector, but we do support on that side as well. So we have experience with both sides of the equation. We're predominantly based in London and Essex areas, but we do have clients all over the country, such as Birmingham, Coventry. I'm originally myself from Nottingham, so I have some connections there. And so we really do support up and down the country, which is really great to see because we get to experience different types of settings, etc., maybe more localized issues that are being faced. Although I think many of the issues being faced by in the nursery sector across the board, we are currently at 3 people now, and we're growing at a rate of knots, and we just want to expand the firm and grow as much as possible and continue to support our client base. We do operate in a number of different sectors as well, but the childcare sector is one where we're really looking to embed ourselves because I've represented clients in the sector for a number of years now. I really find it interesting, and I think that bringing that sort of specialist aspect to the advice that we give really makes a difference, especially on the M&A transactional work where someone's selling their business. It's such a huge life event.
Yeah.
And I think that it's really important to, which I'm sure we'll come on to, really important to work with specialist advisors who can assist with that. So I hope that explains a little bit about us.
Fantastic. And I imagine quite a busy, very busy time for you to be joining into the sector and really pushing that focus there. I mean, the past 2 years has been quite a bit of a whirlwind ride, ups and downs within the M&A sector, activity kind of dropping a little bit that we've seen this year compared to 2021, although some are saying that that's because it was a massive boost in 2021 due to kind of lockdown restrictions easing and people getting back into it. So possibly the M&A market actually now stabilizing as to what it was pre-COVID. And so what are your thoughts on the nursery market at the moment? Are you quite optimistic about the current M&A activity out there?
Generally, I would say yes. I think that the nursery sector as a sector in M&A is generally very positive. Obviously, it helps that there are sort of larger groups on the buyer side, which I think helps with maybe 100% payment on completion type deals, which you don't always see in other sectors. So in like the dentistry sector, etc., you really do see a lot of sort of deferred payment type of structures. So I think that as a general point, that is one advantage that the nursery sector does carry. Obviously, it's uncertain times at the moment, coming out of COVID, and then now with all the political and economic uncertainty, it is difficult. And I think that there will be some adjustments to make in terms of perhaps the expectations of valuations, maybe. Because I think from the sort of buyer's perspective, it is very difficult to be firm on the valuations that are being proposed, etc. And I think that as long as nursery owners who are selling can justify their valuation, with valid reasons, and then verify that valuation as part of the due diligence, I think it would be okay. But I do think that there will be a much greater focus. And I think on the sales side, we need to really recognise that the buyer does need to do their due diligence. The buyer needs to verify the valuations that are being agreed. So I think generally positive on the M&A market as a whole, but we just need to keep an eye on those issues such as valuation, for example, because it can be difficult to arrive at a certain valuation due to just the uncertainty at the moment in the market.
And I guess, that's probably the case for most sectors as well. There's always that valuation reality, maybe buyer, seller not quite seeing eye to eye on it. But I think you can agree as well that what's quite unique to the nursery market is really these people started it, with the best of reasons within them, with a core focus on childcare, but often because they couldn't find it for their own families or their own children. And so there really is a lot of heart put into that, which I guess has its pros and maybe its cons when it does come to valuing a business of that scale, or small, medium, large one. It doesn't really matter. And going on to getting into an advisor. A lot of maybe, let's say, small to medium-sized nurseries have a local lawyer, a local accountant, which absolutely perfect for quite a lot of the tasks, if not the majority, while they were operating. But now coming into quite a complex and very new environment of a sale process, how would you tell nurseries when to approach an advisor? Should they do this right at the beginning? Should they do this prior to that? What should be their thought process there?
Yeah, so I think, of course, I have many clients that, call me up and lean on me for various things, existing clients lean on me for various things, which is great because sometimes we can get into the picture at a very early stage. We can make a difference as early as possible, which is great because the client gets the benefit of that advice as early as possible. So, of course, it's important to approach advisors as soon as possible, whether that is your accountant or your lawyers. Probably would approach them at different stages. The first person you probably call perhaps would be your accountant, because the initial phase of the buyer's discussions and due diligence will be around valuation, and I think that it is important, obviously, to engage with your accountants on that point. It will be necessary. So that's normally the first step in terms of advisors to reach out to. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that you can't speak to lawyers at that point, and I would definitely recommend doing so, because once you've gone through the valuation process, agreed a price, you've got to what we call heads of term stage, which is essentially the summary of the transaction structure, and then you move on to sort of the formal legal process, and the buyer will be doing, a detailed due diligence and scrutiny on the business. Why not think at an early stage, have I got my house in order? Let me speak to specialist solicitors that can tell me, what issues are likely to crop up, what is the buyer looking for. People like ourselves, we see in all types of transactions in the nursery sector common issues that come up, and we can really make that difference to you at an early stage and say, have you got your house in order? Have you got these documents together? And really get you ready for when the deal is agreed in principle and the legal process is carried out. So the short answer is as early as possible, engage with legal and other advisors. That doesn't necessarily mean that you have to instruct us to do all the work at that early stage, but at least engage with us, speak to us, and then at least you know what to expect, and you're not taken by surprise later because you didn't know something.
Yeah, and I guess that actually will end up making the whole process a lot more smooth for you, potentially. The earlier you do it, the more likely you're going to have all that information ready before the sale process really even begins. Would you agree with that? That it does really make a difference on the transition going through?
Yeah, absolutely. I think so. For example, with nursery settings, there's always some kind of freehold property aspect or lease, renewal or something, and perhaps you didn't really think that the lease runs out in a couple of years and the buyer's going to want a longer extension. These are the kind of things that we can sort of talk to you about at an early stage, and it's not uncommon for that process to prolong. And if we can sort of touch base with you early on, then you can kind of nip that in the bud earlier, get the process started, or have those conversations, and meeting those sort of transaction timetables are going to be more likely. And it's going to be music to the ears of your buyer, because if you're already initiating those steps, I've got this sorted. I've spoken to some lawyers, etc. They specialise in nursery sales, and so on. It's only going to, I think, capture their interest even more.
Exactly, and like you say, it makes it easier on both sides, actually, and probably the negotiation part just a lot smoother. So jumping into slightly more maybe technical terms that I kind of wanted to put for our audience so that they can understand a little bit more about some of the options that they could have if they're considering a sale, is would you mind going into a wee bit more detail about assets sale and share sale, and maybe also a wee bit into what advice would you give towards each, and what would make you maybe move towards one depending on the type of seller you're speaking to?
Yeah, absolutely. So in terms, I mean, it's firstly, I would just say that it's really important to engage with the issue of how is my business sale going to be structured, and that needs to be discussed and negotiated at an early stage in terms of what your expectations are, because your buyer is going to be sort of clued up in terms of what they want, but that's not necessarily going to be right for you, including the legal implications of that structure and the tax implications. So generally speaking, if you operate your business with a limited company, then there's broadly two options. There's the asset sale, as you mentioned, which is essentially the company is handing over or selling the individual assets of the business, contracts with the parents, employees, staff, etc., nursery premises and all that, and those individually have to be handed over, but it means you retain all the liabilities of the business, and that's not necessarily going to be in line with what you want, and in terms of the tax implications for you, it's not necessarily going to be the most efficient way of structuring yourself either. In terms of a share sale, that's different to an asset sale, because instead of your company handing over the individual assets of the business, you're actually just handing everything over. So I normally use the analogy of a shopping basket, where in an asset sale you've got the shopping basket and the buyer is picking out what they want, what they need to run the business going forward. You keep the rest, but you don't necessarily want that. But in a share sale, you're just handing over the basket. So that means, so the advantage of that is a clean break for you as the sellers. It's most likely going to be more suitable to your sort of tax goals. But of course, I'm not an accountant, so you need to verify that. I guess the flip side of that is that the buyer will need to carry out some more due diligence, because they're going to be taking on liabilities of the business, things that they potentially don't know about, etc., and they're going to want to do a bit more of a deeper dive into that. But your advisors can take you through that process, etc., and they'll be used to going through that. So a share sale would normally be ideal for you as a seller, I would say, generally, but of course it's all a negotiation. So I hope that sort of draws the distinction there. Of course, if you don't operate in a limited company and you operate the business in your own name or in a partnership which is not a company, then you don't have the option of a share sale. So in that instance, it would always be an asset sale, because that's the only way it can be structured. But in any event, that discussion should still happen with your advisors to ensure that it is structured in the most efficient legal way and tax way.
Brilliant. And I mean, that, to some, and me included at times, can sound quite complex, maybe quite intimidating, but these are quite normal conversations that you have day to day with clients, and you're quite prepared to walk them through it step by step. Am I right?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We would always be prepared to sort of have those discussions with you, and that's because we think it's really important that clients understand that. So if anyone is considering a potential sale now or later down the line, I'm more than happy to receive calls, or jumping on a call like this, for example, on video, just to introduce myself. And it may be that you're not quite ready to sell, but it may be that a year down the line or 6 months down the line, or you're in the middle of negotiations, that we can give you that kind of insight at an early stage.
Brilliant. So near the end, we will get Kush's contact details, and that just shows that you can jump on a call with him whenever you want. No time like the present to start having those conversations. So, this is quite a complex process, and there's a lot of time taken into it. There's a lot of emotions taken into it. And of course, money and care and everything that comes around to that. What would you say are kind of the biggest stumbling blocks that you face from a client's perspective, but also just in general from the process that you kind of expect? I'm sure there's quite common ones that you almost prepare for.
Yeah, there are common ones. I think that some of them may be expected in the sense of they arise frequently. Some of them obviously are unexpected; they just come out of nowhere.
Yeah.
But it is a sensitive process. You know, you've built up the business for many years, sometimes decades, and you're handing over your baby to the buyer. And I think that is an emotional process. So obviously, working with your advisors is good to have that there, because you can manage that, you know, internally, so to speak, sort of on that side. In terms of stumbling blocks, I think that sometimes we get instruction on deals where it's already been structured, heads of terms been signed maybe, or really advanced, and it's very difficult to sort of shift from that. Or maybe the clients haven't taken proper advice from their accountants on valuation and the price. And I think that sometimes the heads of terms, etc., and the way it's been structured is not quite clear. So when we become instructed and involved, maybe the financial aspects have not been thought out in enough detail,
right,
to then take it to the next phase. And we have, although we can help, we aren't accountants or valuers or financial advisors, so there's very little we can do there. We can progress the legals, but sometimes we get that feeling that, you know, mate, I think you should have a conversation with your accountant again, just to double check this is really what you want, and how it's supposed to be structured. And I think that can sometimes delay things a little bit, or cause some concern. So am I doing the right thing? Have I agreed the right price? So I think that just goes to the point of instructing the right advisors at the right time, essentially early on. In terms of other stumbling blocks, the due diligence process can take some time. So, you know, it can take a couple of months to get through that process, which is entirely normal. And, you know, there's going to be a shed load of questions that the buyers are going to be asking, and they're going to issue, part of their due diligence process will be issuing lengthy questionnaires, which you will feel like it's an interrogation of your business.
Yeah.
But, you know, we can assure you that it's entirely normal for buyers to ask these types of questions, and we would work with you and sort of handhold you through that process to help you complete the answers. But I think that one of the stumbling blocks could perhaps be inadequate replies to those questionnaires.
right,
So make sure that, you know, you answer those questions as detailed as possible, with the assistance of your solicitors, of course. Because if they're not detailed enough, or they're not going to fly with the buyers are going to want to ask again, and then they're going to ask again until they've got the answers that they need. Reasonably speaking, I think, if there's documents that just say you don't have, but clearly you should have, or probably do have, then I think that get those documents, get that all together. Yeah. That can really just help. That will be expected, and the transaction will flow much more smoothly, and that won't become a stumbling block. So I would say due diligence replies, comprehensive replies, is sometimes something that we see not always up to scratch. And then I think I would say those are the main ones. I would say one of the bigger sort of more specific kind of issues to consider is the Ofsted handover situation, because of course if for example you're selling your company, and it's kind of like, well, how does it work? How does, you know, at all times we've got to be registered as a provider with Ofsted, and we've got to have a nominated individual registered with Ofsted. But how does that work if you're selling your business today? You know, who's the nominated individual, and how do we apply to Ofsted to get that changed? How quickly are they going to get that changed? I think that needs to be thought about as well, because if you don't think about it soon enough, then it could become a stumbling block in the transaction process, in unraveling that, if that makes sense as to what happens. And then finally, just briefly, I would say that if there is a landlord involved or any other third parties involved with the transaction, try to engage them early on, because, you know, they don't have a huge interest in making sure things are progressing as quickly as possible. You know, they're busy, they're the landlord, they've already got a lease in place or something like that with you. I think that getting their interest in the transaction process can be difficult, so that can be a stumbling block in terms of getting lease renewals done, etc. And without without that, if the buyer needs a longer lease in place, then you can't complete your sale without that process having been completed. So I would say let's engage with the third parties as soon as we can as well.
Yeah, and it's key what you said there about having those documents ready, maybe even before, if you're just about at the beginning of thinking of selling or buying for that matter, actually getting those documents prepared as part, probably even before you approach an advisor, because at the end of the day you're going to be asked for that, so you may as well do your own bit of due diligence prior to that and get as much as possible. And that kind of leads on to the next question on, kind of client expectations on, I guess, how long a process is going to take. And you said just there that due diligence quite normally can take a couple of months, and that's just part of the sale process. And we have heard, people say I can do a deal very, very quickly, it can go very smoothly and like that. And maybe that's the case for some, but I would imagine it's not the case for the norm, that it could be done in, say, 6 to 8 weeks, like that.
Yeah, so I mean, we would generally say that your nursery sale or nursery suitable purchase is probably going to take around 2 to 3 months, or 3 months perhaps, from the time the heads of terms are agreed.
Right.
So it can be done quicker than that. We have done them quicker than that.
Yeah.
Really, if stumbling blocks come in, like we talked about, of course, take longer as well. So in terms of that process, you should expect, once you get to the sort of the heads of terms being agreed, maybe 3 months to get that deal done, subject to any stumbling blocks.
Yeah.
And of course, I mean, the benefit of working with specialist advisors, as we spoke about before, we know the kind of stumbling blocks that can come up. We know what is normal expectations from a buyer's legal advisor, for example. We're familiar with the negotiation points that will come up inevitably in the purchase documentation, and the contracts can be quite lengthy.
Yeah.
It can be sort of 50, 60, 70 pages long, and to negotiate that kind of document, it takes time, and there is back and forth regarding that. Although the solicitors, they do want to get these deals done and across the line, in terms of a negotiation, there is always back and forth, and then hopefully somewhere you meet in the middle somewhere to get the deal across the line. So that just takes time. Of course, you don't want things to drag out. So again, engage with the right advisors who can reassure you, that will make you feel assured that the transaction is progressing smoothly, etc.
Yeah, and as quickly as possible, because for a lot of people within our audience, this could be the first time they're coming to a process like this. And they might, maybe 3-4 months is quite a realistic expectation if everything is in place. And like you say, you don't maybe hit one of those stumbling blocks along the way, or the stumbling block can be quite easily diverted or sorted depending on the advice and how early you get that. And so, going on to the next one as well, it's quite an emotional thing, and there's a lot to be considered when you are selling nursery, including that people side. You're changing hands from owner to owner. Parents are rightfully a wee bit concerned. Maybe staff members as well are a little bit nervous about what a new owner is going to in place, what kind of culture is going to be brought in. But going into the parent side and changing hands with a childcare setting, should both parties have those exclusivity and confidentiality agreements in place prior to due diligence, and indeed the wholesale process as well? What's your advice on that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, think about it. You're engaging with if you're selling your business, you're engaging with a third party who is going to, you're going to hand over or give access to, detailed information about your business. Firstly, you don't want that to be, leaked anywhere, etc. You also don't want the deals of the information of the negotiation being revealed to parents, staff members. That kind of thing would be, very disappointing and difficult to manage. And one of the main things that we do get involved with is discussing how should that information be relayed, because you're selling your business. You want to be probably do want to be the first person to tell your staff that this is happening, and parents as well, to make sure that their concerns are allayed. So it's definitely important to have a confidentiality agreement in place with your buyer. And not just that, but from a legal perspective and a GDPR privacy perspective.
Well, exactly, with childcare business, so much data and regulation involved in that, it is extremely important to keep that safeguarded.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have processes in place to limit that, such as not revealing like children's names, that kind of thing, and other details, which is really really important. So it's important to manage that process. On the exclusivity agreement side, I would say that's more important for the buyers.
Right.
So if you're buying a nursery, you want the comfort that you're negotiating with the owners of the nursery on an exclusive basis, because you're going to spend a lot of time, expense, management time undertaking the due diligence and negotiation process. So it's incredibly important to make sure that you've got an exclusivity agreement in place for X period, whereby the owners can't negotiate with anybody else. And it is normal to expect that. So it shouldn't be a surprise to owners to offer an exclusivity period.
Right. So actually, they should expect something like that to come up, and that's something that somebody like you and your team could support them with right at the beginning, drawing it up and sending it out.
Absolutely. Yeah, that's something we would do as standard. And if the transaction has come to us via, say, a broker, for example, we would still check that there's that in place before we start the bulk of the legal work, which it normally is, to be fair, but we will just double check. So
brilliant, fantastic. And looking at the whole process in general with due diligence, can you maybe detail what some of the key stages are that they're going to go through?
Yeah, absolutely. I think that in any sort of nursery sale, you're going to have buyers undertaking due diligence on the business itself. So they're going to want to look into the company structure. They're going to want to understand the banking arrangements. They're going to want to understand whether there's any financial facilities, etc. The property will need to have a full due diligence process, whether they're sort of taking on the freehold of that or a lease. They're going to look at all the employment contracts, etc., compliance with Ofsted, checking DBS records, etc. Make sure you've done the right checks on your staff members, and that's just some of what they would look into. So that, again, as I mentioned before, would come in the form of questionnaires initially.
Yeah.
So what would normally happen in terms of a process is once the heads of terms, the basic deal structure has been agreed, that we would receive those questionnaires, we would complete the questionnaires, and if we're acting for the sellers, we would create what's known as a virtual data room, which is essentially a cloud-based platform for us to put all the documentation into and then give access to the buyers to that. We would organize it, we'd index it, buyers would expect that. We would take on that responsibility as part of our work to make sure we're presenting the information the right way. And then the buyer would review all of that, maybe request further documentation if there's any gaps, etc. And if there are any concerns, say unforeseen liabilities or risks that they've seen to the business, then those points may be subject to negotiation in the legal documents, which, again, as part of the due diligence procedure, we will conduct those negotiations on your behalf, and along the way we'll explain what's happening with the transaction and what stage we are at. But broadly speaking, we would do that until the parties have agreed a position which is ready to kind of conclude.
Brilliant. And I think a lot of information to take in there within that process, but the main thing is that you and your team and other advisors are there to help step by step through it all. So not to be too intimidated by maybe the amount that you're going to have to deliver on, the amount that you're maybe going to have to sign on to, and the information you're going to have read. You're there step by step to lead them through that.
Absolutely, we're there step by step. So we frequently jump on calls like this to discuss the due diligence questions. It's not uncommon for the questions to be phrased in a way which is not necessarily easily understood. So our job is to kind of try and put that into plain language to understand, sort of say this is what they want, this is what they're asking for. Do you have these documents, and these documents, rather than just saying complete this form for the buyers, like not kind of knowing what and why they're asking these questions, because there can be a lot of questions, but we are readily available, and we regard it as part of our role to take you through that process, and make it as easy as possible for you, because we know that you're dealing with so many other things, like trying not to, reveal things to the staff members just yet, or running the business and making sure that the profits are continuing to be made, so you can show that to the buyer all the way up to completion and give a good handover.
Fantastic. And just before I let you go, Kush, can you give me any kind of final thoughts, either for those who are maybe interested in specifically maybe selling the nursery business over the next 12 months, and anything that you want to say from a perspective at Birdi & Co?
Absolutely, yes. I think that if you're looking to sell your nursery business, in the near future, I think we've covered already, but definitely engage with the right advisors. Make sure that whoever you are speaking to, if it's not us, which it should be, but if it's not, then just make sure you're speaking with solicitors that are not just corporate solicitors that are well versed in M&A transactions, but also specifically have experience in the nursery sector, because you're going to have a bigger advantage with the service that you're receiving, making sure that you're working with advisors that know what they're doing and are familiar with the process. I would also say, again, it's something we have touched upon, which is get your house in order. Just have a look at different things that you might think might come up. For example, GDPR documentation. Are you registered with ICO? These small little things can be easily forgotten. And I would just say, if you want to, speak about anything like that, we can put together like a shopping list for you in terms of what buyers would want, to make sure that you are ready. And some clients really like that, to make sure they're well planned. And then finally, I would just say, I think there is a lot to be positive about in the sector. There are difficulties with retention of staff, sourcing staff, concerns with using agency staff, these kind of things. All these worry funding rates, etc. But I think that there is still, notwithstanding all of those and more, there's still a lot to be positive about. I think there are also talks about recession, etc. And I think that childcare services are generally recession resilient, which is a good thing. I'm not saying that there wouldn't be difficulties, there would, but I think generally it's have a positive outlook on your upcoming sale, and don't try not to feel too concerned about things that you hear, etc. But just speak to the right people